Onion Cycles podcast is about thought-provoking, emotion-evoking, action-driven, step-by-step guidance to explore the unique, glorious, and wonderful ocean of your being. Because healing is a multi-layered process of getting to know oneself. Become the self-empowered empiric researcher by discovering the unique layers of your existence. With your host, Nadine Alma, welcome to the Holistic Healing Hub. Welcome to the Onion Cycles podcast.
The seventh power, the compulsion of rage. What we have remembered, where does the rage originate? First, it was when your best friend left. The one who remembered you, the one you fell in love with, the one you trusted more than yourself, and the one who made sure any pain and suffering you went through soon had meaning. Then it was your husband, your partner, your son's father, the one who changed his mind, who hardened his heart after you had already handed yours to him to hold, to harbor like a sparrow in his palm. First it was your best friend and then your husband. No, this isn't where it began. First, it was the teenager who crept into his sister's room while you slept, while you were in the last trusting sleep you would ever have. The one who confused you for an object, the one who had no idea that what he was doing severed you from your body. Then there was your best friend, and then there was your husband. No, this isn't when it started. First, there was that moment in Sunday school when you read how women were silenced, how they were only ever the supporting actress in this variation of a story about God, and how the presence that you sensed before you went to church had been left out. What was within you was not outside of you, and this was the beginning. No, the first betrayal is every time you remain silent about what you hear in your heart. That is the most primal deception, this inability or unwillingness to trust what you hear inside you, and this voice that doesn't have a voice without you. There is no time in love. There is only intention. There is only the promise of redemption. When we let this love reach to where it has never been before, to where we are broken, this is when we reclaim what was always ours. We are gifted this presence of the love inside us, and the first and last betrayal is the moment we stop listening. It's the moment we lose our faith in this presence that proves we are more than just our mistakes. We are more than just human. It's only the ego that suffers betrayal. This is why you are beyond words and beyond any need to ever defend this eternity you hold in you. There is no you that can ever be threatened. We have remembered the love that can only come to life through us from within. Hello and a warm welcome, my beloved fellow healing integrating onions. Welcome back. I virtually hug you, and I am very happy that you decided to spend another week with us here in this beautiful space where we are able to open up and show our wounds and get to know those wounds and get to know the beautiful sides in all of us, the fragments, the specks, the microcosm that has our name on it, that is us. And this week we are basically through 2 months of deep inner thought and deep inner reflection on what it means to be human. Welcome back to the Being Human series. We have story 30, episode 31 today. The topic is the seventh power, which is the wisdom of the wrathful person, or the compulsion of rage. All of you who have just tuned in today or this week, this series is based on Meggan Watterson's Mary Magdalene Revealed, and more specifically on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and how she describes this blueprint of what it means to be human, this blueprint of what makes us human and how we actually can navigate our lives and everything that hardens our heart and covers up our soul to, yeah, let us just have more compassion for ourselves and be able to understand ourselves better. And as you know, each and every episode of our Onion Cycles podcast is dedicated to just the same thing. It's about getting to know yourself in order to become more whole, in order to become more healed, more integrated, fuller, brighter, and shining example of how when we change ourselves, we change the world around us. So, before we start, I'll have this little disclaimer. The ones who listen every week know that already. We work with the concept as I think, so I feel, so I act, which means that it's absolutely lovely if you think about the episode, if you make it through to the end and then have some thoughts that evoke some emotions in you. But the bottom line is that we need to come into an active mode. We need to get into doing something if we really want to see results, if we really want to take this journey of self-growth and self-development. Not that we are broken, we're just perfect the way we are, but in a sense, the only constant in life is change. Therefore, we are part of this world. The only constant in our lives is change as well, and stagnancy and stuck energy results in us being less satisfied with ourselves, with our world, with our reality than what we could have in our lives. So I welcome you into this space where it's all about getting to know yourself in order to make yourself into mold yourself into the person you want to be and the life you want to have. To assist you on that journey, I make a worksheet for every podcast episode. That worksheet contains all the notes of what we have discussed in the week, as well as some exercises which are mirroring the action part of this podcast. I am very happy that you're here today. I am very curious if you have anything to say about this topic. I would welcome it wholeheartedly if you feel like it, to drop a comment below on how your journey is, what your thoughts are. As I always say, sharing is caring. There might be a person out there who just needs to read or hear what you have to say, and in order to get that message that would serve them very well, it is needed that someone else gets active and shares their thoughts. So feel free to leave a comment, feel free to contact me with whatever you need. Everything you need to contact me is on my website, www.wonderfinder.org, where you find the podcast episodes and the worksheets and the email. Now, this topic, the wisdom of the wrathful person, was something that was very far away from me. This topic of having anger or being wrathful is very far away from me. I had an episode where the rage would just come out during discussions with my previous partner, but overall, anger is not an emotion that dictates my primary experience on this earth. So, coming to this last seventh power and realizing that there is a much deeper hidden trigger within myself concerning that very topic, I had to sort of dive deep and do an extra research and be extra curious for myself to be able to make this episode round it up, like have a topic or have this podcast episode be really deep into understanding what anger is. And what I found was that I want to structure this podcast episode into basically two separate possible ways of understanding anger. The one is the destruction side and the other is the instruction side. So the one is about how and what does anger tell me about myself, and the other one is about how anger, as everything in life without balance, can have its destructive ways with us, with our personality, within our environment. Before I go into those two, I also wanted to point out what I have learned, what wasn't present in my mind, and what I never discussed in my psychology class. I found that through the podcast Your Inner Child Matters and through the podcast by Tim Ferriss. So, in those two, Dr. Gabor Mate speaks about anger and he makes two distinctions. He says there is every anger basically is healthy because there is like this immediate flurry of hotness and eruption that just tries to tell us that our boundaries have been violated. It's like a boundary that has been crossed, that has been transgressed in a way that is not alright for us, that doesn't feel alright. So this immediate anger that comes up, that healthy anger, sort of erupts, tells us about something, initiates boundary defense, if you will, and then it slowly dies down again. So if we express it, it can come out in a healthy way. I would give the description of someone comes too close to you and doesn't know his social etiquette, and he's like basically nose to nose with you talking, and then you step back and say, look, this is too close, please stay away. And then if they come close again and violate that boundary that you just explained to them, you basically experience that rage to defend that boundary. And if you express it, then it can come out, and then it's sort of like a healthy anger that doesn't linger. So it's a short-term anger that erupts. And then he says that the one that is most common and that makes rage such a taboo and stigmatized topic is that anger that is suppressed. And for most of us, that obviously happens through growing up. We all know the first 7 years, and even in the womb, we basically absorb anything around us, every energy and every emotion from our mother, everything our primary caretakers do and make us do and persist upon, we absorb and take on and form out of that our personality, our character. There are traits already in there, but is heavily affected by the environment. So what he says is when we as a child are reprimanded for expressing anger, or if we are shut down, or if we sort of realize that that emotion that we just expressed isn't welcome and has the potential to get us rejected from our primary caretakers, then we sort of shut it down and shove it really deep and won't address it again. So he says in that moment is exactly the toxicity that then erupts when we are an adult, when we're a teenager, when we're an adult, and that is the destructive anger, because essentially it doesn't have a purpose anymore. It had a purpose back then, but because we couldn't access the purpose of it and the necessity of expressing it, and because we fear rejection and we just disassembled this part of us, this emotion, as something bad and labeled it bad and suppressed it, it doesn't really have a purpose anymore. It just points us back to a past long gone, maybe even a past we don't even remember, right? And layer upon layer of suppressing more anger and suppressing more and more then we don't even know where it really originates. So I found that extract that I read to you from the book by Meggan Watterson, Mary Magdalene Revealed, eye-opening in the sense that, yeah, if you just think about for a second, well, where does my anger originate? You come up with an explanation of something very recent. But then something in you tells you, well, yeah, it kind of made me mad, but actually it's not that relevant. But if we sort of follow that chain to what Dr. Gabor Mate was saying and what Meggan Watterson in her book essentially is saying too, is that, oh yeah, in the situation we actually overreact, but that's because we buried something that we weren't allowed to express, and it built over time. So in a sense, it's not really overreacting, it's just showing us that there is something deeper underlying the issue, right? So that gives us, again, a absolutely valuable possible way to navigate if we go through a phase where we experience a lot of anger. I'm gonna go into a description on how to handle this sort of anger later on. I just want to briefly touch the two basic parts of anger that I found very inspiring. If we divide anger in instruction and destruction, we quite quickly see that, as with all the other powers we discussed, and as with everything in life, really, it's about the balance, but it's also about the mental plane, about understanding where it comes from in this and how to deal with it and why it is there. So the theory of the anger and understanding what it might tell us and how it can be instructive and destructive can help us a lot already in working through the issue and working through what really made us angry in the first place. So instruction, it basically is already naming what it is about. So instruction, I visualize sort of like a compass. It's like a well-defined sense of self, like a well-defined inner compass. When you experience anger, you know quite well and quite right what happened and how you feel like boundaries were violated. So in that one part of the spectrum of the instruction, you see anger as a friend, and it's telling us something. As I said, the boundary has been crossed, so what are we going to do about it? So in a sense, that side of the spectrum of anger is a protector. It's like anger protects us and those who can't defend themselves. So if you speak up for someone, or if you see someone is abused and then you speak up because you get really angry, it's like a flooding of the system with clarity and purpose and love. So anger in the face of injustice, for example, if you step in because someone is mistreated, is an expression of love. And anger is also a declaration that the you inside of you, what you think, what you feel, what you understand, what you make the world out to be, what your perception is of the world matters, right? So anger is also there to be finally heard and finally seen. It's like a very core emotion. It's one of the 5 basic emotions of us humans, and every mammal has anger. So anger can be motivating, unifying. It can be an expression of love, and it can sort of have a lot of wisdom in it if we're able to reflect on it from that point of view. But then, as I said, there's like the other part of the spectrum, the other side of the spectrum, where anger is also destruction. It's like, instead of having a well-defined sense of self and a compass within, you sort of are boundaryless and acting on your anger, acting out on others, because it's basically getting the leash off a toddler, and everyone, I think, has experienced a toddler in the supermarket when they don't get what they want. They're like, all hell breaks loose. And that's quite alright. Like, that's a healthy expression for a toddler, but it's certainly not a healthy expression if you are a grown up, if you are part of a society, because that's where your own responsibility comes in. And I think the bottom line of understanding anger from that point of view is taking responsibility, right? It's like an entry to the other powers if you don't take responsibility, because what you're going to do if you're angry and if you lose someone you love, and then you start going into the darkness maybe, or you start going into desire, or you just experience and define yourself as human and just overindulge in everything. So it makes sense that it's the seventh power, because I feel like it has a sort of like an entry addiction drug to falling prey to the other powers that we discussed in the previous episodes. But it's also a force of nature. It comes from such a deep core within you that I feel like it's a superpower that, if you know how to navigate and how to work with it, can really actually show you a clear roadmap to yourself, right? Because if we look again at the destruction side of anger, if one lives in anger and bitterness, and you're like overcome by anger a lot, and you scream a lot, and it's like anger can devour you, right? It's from the inside out, and taking poison every time if you don't work through it, where it comes from and what it tells you, right? If you just act upon it. And another quote in the book was when Meggan Watterson quoted Hannah Gadsby. She's a comedian. You can look her up on YouTube. She's actually quite fun. And she said, I have the right to experience anger, but I don't have the right to take it out on others, right? So I don't have, I have a right to be angry, but not to spread it. And there is so much wisdom in that, because as soon as you take responsibility for your own emotional world, and you take back that power and be self-empowered by deciding what those emotions mean for you, what those emotions mean to you, you're then able to work through those emotions and become a wholer and content human being just by working with yourself. So that gives you enormous powers to accept that responsibility and accept that roadmap to navigate being human by that gospel by Mary Magdalene, right? So in a sense, when you experience anger, you ask, is it harmful? And if you have to answer yes, then you are on the destruction side of the spectrum of anger, where anger can divide. And if you ask, is this full of wisdom? Then, which is stated in the title, wisdom of the wrathful person, is this wisdom that comes out of me? Then you are on the other side, on the instructive side of the spectrum, where the boundaries, where the anger is sort of a friend there to be motivating, to unify people, to make yourself heard and seen, and give you that sense of purpose, right? And so when we conclude those both sides of the spectrum from instruction to destruction, and when we sort of have understood on a mental level what anger does and how it works, and that there is actually a spectrum, and that taking back your responsibility to deal with it on your own terms, in your own ways, as long as it doesn't hurt yourself or others, then I feel like that's just a wonderful way to dive into the own anger issues that everyone deals with. So it's a perfect opportunity to imagine that spectrum, and maybe even have numbers going for 1 to 10 to see, all right, if I'm an 8 and I could just explode and it was so unfair, and I saw how they abused this other person, and then I stepped in and was able to call the police, the call 911, and then just be able to process what that did to me. Now I'm a 4, and I realized that I actually would have never done that and never stepped in if that compulsive rage didn't erupt within me. So it's like visualizing that spectrum and being able from there to decide if your anger is in fact instructive or if it's destructive. So now for the last part of the podcast, this is a TED Talk I want to mention by Juna Mustard. The title of the TED Talk she did is called Anger is Your Ally. And what she says is that there is a possibility to make your anger your ally. She holds up her hands and she makes a fist, and the thumb is underneath the 4 fingers in the fist. And she explains that the thumb actually represents the amygdala, where the emotional reactive side of us lives. So if we go back to the example of the toddler screaming in a supermarket because they didn't get what they wanted, the amygdala is having the lead wheel in that scene. And then she explained that the part between the arm and the hand is representing the brainstem, where the basic bodily functions lie in, and then the 4 are over the thumb. They are basically the prefrontal cortex, where we have the regulation, where we have the wisdom, where lies the wisdom. And she says what you want to basically do as soon as you are in that compulsive rage is 4 things represented by each of those wise fingers that cover the amygdala, the emotional reactive part of our brain. So she says, first, breathe. And we discussed breathing in a previous podcast episode and how it can regulate your nervous system, how it can get you out of fight, flight, or freeze response. The first thing you want to do is just breathe through the anger. So if you're really interested and curious about breathing exercises and how you can actually work with your emotions through breathing exercises, do some YouTube research or Google research. There's a lot out there that can help you find what resonates most with you. We had our very first episode where we talked about staying curious, and then not only does that mean that you do your own research and that you just take away with you what resonates with you, it also means that you, through trial and error, find out what works for you and what doesn't and what needs to change. So if you want to take that upon yourself, step 1, when anger hits, come back onto the mindfulness train, because mindfulness is paying attention with kindness and curiosity. So the first reaction you want to have is just take deep breaths and breathe through that emotion and not get immediately in a reactive state that either is suppressing or acting upon your wrath. The second one is name it. Like really say, I feel angry. Don't say I am angry, because you are not your emotions. Your emotions aren't you. You can regulate your emotions, and therefore you feel angry. Or I feel tension. I feel the tension in my neck. I feel the tension in my fist. I feel the tension in my arms. Name it, and then you're redirecting the energy into those parts that hold that tension to then be able to come back into your body fully. So it's more of like a breathing that calms your nervous system to be able to feel your body again. And then we step 3, do it differently. So instead of acting upon it, acting out, blaming others, suppressing it, rejecting it, or deeming it to be something negative, try to feel compassion for yourself. So if you say, oh, I feel angry and I feel the tension, and then suddenly there might come this light bulb moment where you say, well, actually, I feel lost. Actually, I feel betrayed. Actually, I feel that I have no idea how to deal with this situation, or something like that. So, how can you be kinder to yourself and others in this situation where wrath and anger appears? And the moment you do it differently, the moment you exercise your free will on how to deal with your own emotions and take responsibility for those emotions and see that they're actually just a trigger of either something instructive or destructive, a trigger to remind you that a boundary has been crossed right now, or has been crossed since early in your childhood and growing up, and now that trigger surfaces again, and you're able to actually ask where does it come from, why does it appear now, and what happened back then that I still carry that with me. So it's an opportunity, really. So to recap, you have those 4 fingers over your thumb. Number 1 is the wise movement back to mindfulness through breathing. Number 2 is naming it, not suppressing it, naming it, letting it be there. I feel angry, I feel tension in some parts of my body. The third one is do it differently. Try to feel compassion towards yourself, and know that you're not alone, and know that this is a primal feeling. It's a primal emotion. It's a basic emotion that all mammals have. And although we've been told it's not welcome and it's not good to have, and that it shouldn't be there, that is just simply not the truth. It has a purpose, it has a meaning. And then the 4th finger, the little one, is telling us to inquire. And that is basically the action part of where you go into what needs to be supported, what needs to be protected right now, what action is required of me to further process that feeling. And that can look like sitting down later in the day, journaling about why that rage came up. That is about talking to another person, to a therapist, and doing deep work to find out where that rage came from, and if it is a problem, because sometimes it's not a problem. Sometimes people just have that talent of just knowing how to deal with their own anger. But if you're someone who would describe themselves as having compulsions of rage, then this might be a starting point to work with those 4 steps and see if you find out where you've been hurt before, where you've been left alone, where you feel lost before, and where you felt not heard, not understood, not seen, not validated. And with all that said, my beloved fellow healing onions, I am so honored that you decided to spend some of your time with me again. I am very blessed for those who tune in every week and who really try to work on their light and really believe in themselves, love themselves, and let that light within them emanate out into the world. You're wonderful, you're seen, you're understood, and you're so valuable. I mean it with all my heart. Every single one of us is a special diamond, and no one is the same, and we are here for a reason. Never give up on yourself, and just know that I do send you with all my heart all the energy of love and support to you, and we're here next week again. I'm looking forward to that, and until then, all the very best in the world, my beloved fellow healing onions.